Hello and welcome to A Tippling Philosopher. This is me, Jonathan M.S. Pierce, and not just me. Tonight we are going to have guests, but before I talk about that, I just want to say, because I'm, using up the time that the adverts are probably on, so no one live can hear what I'm saying now, but that's how I roll. Thank you for joining in. Welcome to an Ask Me Anything session, which is basically does what it says on the tin. Ask me anything about philosophy, religion, really anything, and we'll talk about it. And hopefully, I can answer questions and just generally stimulate some discussion in the live chat, or just stimulate some thought in your own head. I'm going to be joined by, hopefully tonight, a number of channel members. So you can join the channel, and one of the perks I offer is the opportunity occasionally to come on and chat and have a ready-made platform to talk about stuff and to express your views about things, or to just tell your story. A lot of philosophy of religion is about these esoteric abstract ideas, but religion is also, or lack of religion is also about leaving religion and how that can affect you. Now, in the UK, that's a very different thing to being in the US. In the UK, we're generally religiously apathetic. Most of the modern statistics show that actually most people aren't religious in the UK. British Attitudinal Survey, I think, is about 52% non-religious. That's obviously can be people who are religious and spiritual, not religious but spiritual. People who do believe but don't have an organized religion. There are, it depends how you slice and dice these definitions. But the point is that culturally and societally, we are not particularly religious. So if you leave a religion in the UK, everyone's a bit like meh. Because usually most people weren't shouting about their religion, particularly in sort of Church of England Christianity. So leaving religion is not a big thing over here. But in America, that can be a big thing, where your entire community is built on religious grounds, your family, your social networks, your politics, all wrapped up with how you do religion. And leaving that can be a really challenging thing, both sociologically and psychologically. And actually economically, I know people who have left religion, and like, I can't tell people because I will lose my clients to my job, in the job that I do, whatever that may be. So these things have much greater ramifications in certain areas of the world than they do in the UK. So, for example, becoming an atheist in Pakistan is arguably pretty difficult. In Saudi Arabia, atheist bloggers get locked up in jail ad infinitum, and so these things are met with great challenges. But there you go. Anyway, please hit us with the questions in the live chat. I'll try and answer as many as I can. If I don't know the answer, I won't make stuff up. I will just say I don't know. Especially these days, with my brain being slightly faulty compared to what it used to be. My MS last few weeks has been quite challenging. So hopefully I can maintain a cogent set of thoughts for you. Anyway, that's that. If you have any super chats, that's obviously hugely appreciated. That's what keeps me going, keeps this channel alive. And I'll definitely answer those questions for sure. But just great to have you here with us. So my first channel member guest of the evening is a guy called Ricky. Now, I don't know an awful lot about Ricky. I don't know about his past experiences with religion, although he was a member of a particular religious persuasion that I actually know nothing about. So that's going to be interesting for me to hear his account of A, what he did believe, and B, where he's at now and how he got there. So, without further ado, let's bring on my first guest. And if you have any general questions about anything, hit us with them or hit me with them. So here we go. Ricky, welcome to the channel for the first time, for our first ever channel members get together in public. Thanks for popping on, mate.
Hey, it's great to be here with you, Jonathan.
Yeah, no worries. So you are obviously American, judging by your accents. I know this, but tell us a little bit about where you're from, as much as you're happy to say that. And kind of where you were in terms of your religious belief, and maybe like why you were there?
Well, I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's way up north. What we call a Yooper accent. It's kind of sounds Canadian, but we're not Canadian. So they're across Lake Superior from us, though.
So a bit, is that Fargo, sort of,
Sort of Fargo-ish, yeah. I do get a kick out of Fargo because the accent is fairly similar.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm born and raised here. Was born into a religion that was it's called it's a branch of Lestadianism. So Lestadius was a preacher in northern Sweden, what they call an area like Lapland, and he had an awakening in mid 1800s. And this awakening, he basically had this branch of this Lestadian religion was created. And somewhere, it must have been around the late 1800s, early 1900s, some immigrants came to the United States and brought the religion here with them.
So is it what's the difference between Lestadianism and just regular Christianity?
In Lestadianism, they do it's like the laying of the hands on people for granting them absolution. So when they ask forgiveness from each other, and so what they say is like it comes from you got Luther, and then some of the keys, like the keys to the kingdom, were handed from Luther, and then it kind of went underground and somehow popped into northern Sweden at some point with Lestadianism when he had what he called a spiritual awakening. He was a state pastor before he had this awakening, and in the area he was in, there's a lot of drinking and stuff like that. So there's a lot of alcoholism. So he preached fire and brimstone sermons, basically scared the people in the area to eventually a lot of people quit drinking because he scared the fear of hell into them. And his sermons were very fire and brimstone. And he also talked about, like, in his preaching, a lot of things he'd talk about would be like these descriptions of hell. And he'd also, his preachings, and I've read some of his writings. He'll talk about whores' bottoms dripping in church and blue flames of piss going into demons' mouths in hell, and all. It's pretty
Wow.
intense.
Wow. Yeah.
Very intense.
That sounds pretty different, certainly, to the experiences I had sort of growing up with a very C of E Church of England style of Christianity, which
Yeah.
is like all very nice Sunday church service where you pay very little attention, and then sing a nice song, and then drink some tea. So
Yeah.
how did you get how deep were you into it, and how did you start to get your doubts about belief?
Well, being born and raised in it, like my mother was, she grew up in the religion. My father didn't. He was actually from Chicago, and he had come to do college and up north and had met her at some point, and then he got into the religion. Then he said he had kind of searched for a religion his whole life and didn't find a place, and he found one within this religion. So I grew up in it. So, you know, a lot of the damage I think that's done is when you're indoctrinated into those religions at an early age, it's so ingrained in you that, like, even if you, like, I didn't feel comfortable even when I was a young child, even I'd say 6 or 7 years old, I didn't feel like I belonged there. But you're so indoctrinated into this fear that no matter what I thought, like, I liked science fiction. I was more interested in learning knowledge, all this stuff. But the intellect is preached against because with the intellect, you can't comprehend Christianity, is what they'd say. So they talk, against the intellect quite often. So you're
Really? So it's
warned.
more of a sort of emotional, intuitive kind of.
It's very, yeah, very emotional. Very, it's experiential. Is
Yeah.
like Lestadius, the area he preached in. There was a Sami there, which the Sami people were more like, I would guess I would kind of compare them to kind of Native Americans. And so, like, this Sweden, they were trying to assimilate them for a few hundred years. Lestadius was actually part Sami, so he's able to relate to them. So I think that's another thing, is he had that going for him when he was, trying to get these people. I think his intentions were good to try and like save them from, the state is putting pressure on to assimilate them, and I think he was trying to help them. So I think he had good intentions, and he did get, people to stop drinking, which was, really causing a lot of destruction in their lives up there. But the problem is, you swap that out for, this intense religion where people are living in fear, and then those that, you know, church then was compulsory there. They had, you had to go. So some of the Sami, I think, that didn't believe. I read stories about some of them. They weren't supposed to have their native colors in their clothing. It was supposed to be pretty, drab, bland clothing, and some of them would stitch like small little colors of their, normal apparel inside of their stuff, and as an act of defiance and stuff.
Wow. So I mean, this is a really interesting kind of thing that you see often with religion, which is trying to get conformity, trying to stamp out kind of individualism and maybe identity that's an outsider identity. So yeah, I can imagine that, that being pretty destructive. So for you, so you're saying that you always were a bit, swimming against the currents.
Yeah.
So then how did you get out, and then what were the ramifications of you getting out?
Well, it's actually I didn't get out until 3 years ago, which was already in my mid 40s.
Wow.
Well, it's what they call, they say you have to accept it all or nothing. Like,
Yeah.
you have to follow, this way, or else you can't live with both the foot and one foot in the world, as they call it, or one foot in the church. And I, for the most part, lived my whole life with one foot in, one foot out. And there was even a time, I'd say my late teens, early 20s, where I didn't go for like maybe 2 years or something like that. But it's like, growing up, I had, because in this religion, there's music is preached against, movies. There are more details I'll give you later on what's warned against and stuff like that. But
So
so
it's
it's like
basically like
all music.
living in the movie Footloose.
It's, yeah, Footloose is I can relate to it, but Footloose might be a little liberal compared to that preacher might
Yeah.
be a little liberal compared to what I grew up in.
Yeah.
But so like I had a neighbor he was very much into science fiction, not in my church or whatever. And so I'd go to his house to watch movies, TV shows. We both were into Star Wars and all that stuff. So I basically live vicariously through the neighbors to get my worldly pleasures, as they would call it.
Wow.
And as like into my teens, we'd sneak off to the movies. I'd, hang out with my friends. We listened to heavy metal music. I've been a metalhead since I was young. So
But were
it's
you
like,
a kind of an underground metalhead? You were like
yeah,
secretly.
exactly. It depends on where you're at. And, you could have your music cranked, but if you're in town and you happen to see somebody from church, you turn the music down a little bit at stoplights. So
Was the town quite churchy? As in, was it that church, or
yeah.
was there a multiplicity of churches?
Yeah, and what's interesting about Laestadianism is that there's many sects of it. It started out as basically Laestadius, and then his right hand man, who was Eratama. He's the one who pretty much came up with the laying of the hands and asking forgiveness. Where the people in church, they weep and confess their sins to each other, to all the members and stuff like that. But
Well, that's an interesting thing to do, isn't it? I mean, that's going to be dangerous, because letting out your deep dark secrets to kind of everyone.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then okay, what was your question again? I think I'm
Well,
on
it's
a
just
lost
like,
course.
was your town like just the one
Oh yeah,
church?
yeah.
You know.
So this, as things these normally go, when you get a few charismatic men that have different ideas, there's these schisms and there's break aparts. So from the origination of Laestadianism, there's many different branches now, and
Yeah.
each claiming that they have the keys to the kingdom. And,
Naturally.
and of course, in our town, there's several different branches of it. And what's interesting, it kind of reminds me of a story I read at one time of a town where there was 4 different Amish sects, all pointing at the other ones. They're going to hell. Well, that's what it is for our
Have you
Laestadian
have you
sects.
have you heard that Emo Phillips joke where
I don't think
he's
so.
like, "Oh, are you a Christian? Yeah, I'm a Christian. Oh, nice one. What kind of Christian are you? Oh, I'm a Baptist. Oh, I'm a Baptist too. What kind of Baptist? I'm a Southern." And it goes, and this thing goes on and on and on, and it goes
Yeah,
down all these ones. He's like, "Are you a Southern Baptist?" Blah, 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 blah. No, I'm not. I'm from the West. He's like, "You bastard!"
yeah,
It's like, so it goes down, and there are so many, and then suddenly he's
yeah.
like totally evil because he's just the wrong one.
Yep,
Um,
that's
but
exactly what
yeah.
it's like. So you have
I've got I've
Yeah.
got Chindy Chimbaloo that's going to come on in a minute, but
Okay.
just to let you know that I'm going to bring on someone else
Okay.
who but I'll introduce him in a second. But I want to concentrate on you for a little bit as well. So you're at the stage in your 40s then when you think, right, well, what do you think? How have your doubts got the better of you?
Well, yeah, in my teens, I met my girlfriend, now wife. We've been married for 29 years. She was from the world, and people like myself were not supposed to be with the world, you know. Well, I ended up, unfortunately for her, roping her into the religion, and she stayed in the religion with me for all those years. And so, as I got later, I'd say 30s and on, I just got more and more depressed. Just more and more depression, which I didn't know why. And it's come to find out, after you're trying searching for answers, talking to preachers, think different things like that, looking at the religion, trying to figure out why you can't understand this. Like this, what they're saying doesn't make sense. I find too many logical fallacies and stuff in it. And you find, that they say that God is speaking through them, but then I'd hear them say things I knew were incorrect. And I'm thinking, well, why would God get that incorrect? So anyway, I get into my early 40s and my depression was so bad. And so I thought I turned to psychology for answers, but on my own. Like I started reading and learning and a lot of, YouTube podcasts and just trying to figure out like what's going on with me. Like, why am I getting so depressed? And like, I have, I have a, otherwise great life, but the religion thing just always stuck me as something that was strange. So when I'm learning about cognitive dissonance and stuff, and I'm like, there's the answer now. Now I'm, going on that road of finding out why am I so depressed? Is because I'm fighting what I know to be true, that what they're saying is false and I shouldn't have this fear. So then I'm learning from Bart Ehrman and like I said, a lot of psychology and studying the Bible too, that, studying the Bible and seeing what was in there compared to what they're saying. And there's a lot of differences there. And
So
this is
was it
like
a case then of pulling the thread, and that
pulling it, yes,
thread just comes unraveling, your jumper
which
starts unraveling, and then
which
you
is
know,
what
but it's
yeah,
s-
and they warned
so
me my whole life about this too, preaching every Sunday. The devil will grab you by the pinky and then the hand, little by little. So, technically they're right.
but
That
yeah, and so it's interesting because you say intellectualism was you were warned against that, but
yes,
for good reason, right? So if you are going to present um, a belief system to a congregation and you want them to stay within that system, then the temptations of rationality and learn knowledge about how things might work in the world other than how you said, that's a challenge and that's a threat. And so therefore, yeah, I fully understand why you'd say don't go and read these books and learn about these things,
exactly.
because actually
Yeah.
the chances of you leaving this
And it's
that
not the
that
devil,
that's
it's not the devil that's grabbing you. It's just knowledge and you're just learning. And I'd say after about 2 years of this, what I'd call deep diving, like, just I get obsessive and I'm just pouring through everything, trying to learn truth, whatever truth is, I'm trying to find truth. And I remember one day I was just at work, a normal day, and it just everything came together all just at once, and it hit me. I was like, "This is all BS." I've been, it's just, I've been bullshitted my whole life. They don't know any better though. They think they're helping me and telling me the truth, but they just don't know. And so I'm like, the answer is I have to get out of this environment. It's not good. It's not healthy for me because my brain is fighting against itself. I have this natural inclination to chase intellectual things and I like, and a lot of them will quite understand it because they'll think, well, he just wants to partake in the pleasures of the world, and that has nothing to do with it. It's just that truth is more important to me than following an idea that one man had. And I would say that when I realized, okay, this all came from the idea of one man,
mm.
and that changed everything. I'm like, this is just a guy, flesh and blood, who had an idea. He was,
When you see that happens in so many different Muhammad, you could say that that's what happened with Muhammad. You could say that with any denomination where someone's gone off and said, right, no, this is the truth, and I've got Joseph Smith and the Mormons. When you see that happening all over the shop, then in some sense you got to say, at some point you got to say, well, like, I don't believe any of them, and that there's a direct parallel with my own belief system there. So surely that should cast doubts on my own belief system.
yeah. And
Um,
then,
sorry, yeah, Karen.
after, once I realized this, then I was worried because my wife was in the church and I was afraid to talk to her about this because I'm thinking, I don't want to rip the rug out from underneath her. So I figured, well, I'm just gonna keep going with her until the time is right to talk about it. And so I went for, I don't know how long it was, 9 months, a year, maybe, physically and mentally out.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was very fascinating to sit there listening to preachers, knowing what I knew, and then when I hear them say something
Mm.
wrong, inside I'm screaming, "No, no, that's not right," or whatever. Well, then one night we were going for a walk. She mentioned something I could tell that was like she was thinking about something that was questioning the church, and I thought, here's my opportunity. And so I said, "Well, I got to tell you something. I don't want to go to the church anymore." And she's just like, stopped and like, "Whoa!" Like you could tell she was a foot out. There was, something was bothering her. So then after that, we talked about it for a long time. We, made plans that, okay, our daughter was going to confirmation with that summer. So we were wondering, should we send her or not? We said, well, we'll send her and let her make her own decision on this.
Was your
So
wife? Did your wife? Was she having doubts as well? Was she in the same boat
yeah,
as
she
you?
was. Yeah, she was having doubts too. So the more we talked about it, I found she was having a lot more doubts than I knew about. So it was good that we could both be open about it. So then we figured, well, we got to stay in the church till my daughter's done with her confirmation. So we just went through, did all the stuff we had to do and show up for the events and stuff like that. And but day one of confirmation, when I had to pick my daughter up, she was telling me things she found problematic with what the preachers were saying. And inside, I was thinking, "Oh yes, this is great," because she's. I mean, they weren't. They said she should. I think she mentioned she wanted to go to college, and they said no. You should want to be a mother and uh, wife. That's it. And when I picked her up, she told me that, and I was like, "Oh, she's out. She's just that's good too." So it made the transition easier. So I left first, and they ended up staying a little bit longer than I did. And then while she was there, people were doing the love bombing, trying to keep her in there because her husband's gone, the devil has him, and all these other things. So it was a very stressful time.
Well, look, I'll tell you what. I think this has given us a good basis for us maybe having a whole, if you're up for it, Ricky, a whole interview with you to talk about if you're comfortable with that, exactly what you're kind of doing now, and we can spend a lot longer sort of
Oh yeah, that
dwelling
would
on
be.
some of the. If you're cool with that,
I
Ricky,
would love it.
maybe in
That'd be great. I have
a few
a lot
weeks'
of
time
a
we'll
lot
do
of
that.
stories to share that I haven't shared yet, and some of them pretty amusing that you'll get a kick. I mean, they're funny but not funny kind of things.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. No, that sounds absolutely perfect. Just, but I'm sorry to cut you off there. I have another member guest who I'm going to bring on as well. This is Chindy Chimbalu, who is a member of the channel, is a theist, but quite an honest theist in a way. I don't mean to cast aspersions on theists being not being honest, but as in honest with the way that he approaches the challenges that we on atheist channels like this present, and saying, yeah, okay, that is a problem, but I overcome that with faith. And so he often has very interesting, comments and super chats and whatnot on the channel. So it's great to have him here, and it's great to have him as a supporter of the channel. Chindy, welcome. Thanks so much for popping in.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me over. I really do appreciate it.
No, it's an absolute. Well, I hope it's an absolute pleasure. I mean, I don't really know you from Adam, but I feel like I know you a bit, and I like all the things you've said. So you've just heard, I presume, Ricky's experiences of religion, which is a very kind of very strict moral bubble, if you like, dictated a form of religiosity that he had to adhere to. Um, does that accord with your experiences of religion? Or do you have completely different experiences? Talk us through, your upbringing, when and where, and how you came about your religion.
Yes, so for me, there are a lot of differences, a bit similar in my teenage years, but that has nothing to do with my parents. It has to do with who influenced me, which was one of my parents, my mom's friend, who I'll get to later on. I was actually born in Syracuse, New York, so I'm an American, but as you see, I don't have an American accent because I grew up in Zambia. So, Zambia is a former British colony, and so that sort of thing, although
You've definitely got some Britishisms in there. I can
Well,
already hear.
it's very little. I went to school with a mixture. Also, my elocution lessons were with somebody who was originally from Britain, so maybe that made a little bit of a difference. I don't know. So my parents were Anglican, although I would say my dad really was not interested in church at all. My mom slightly interested until I was about 10 years old, and she got really, really interested in church. But it was mostly Anglican. My parents were doing this because of my grandparents, who were Anglican due to the British colonization. My tribe, which is a small tribe, were kind of collaborators during colonization. So that's another story, but I won't go into that for now. So
well, we don't have time for opening that can of worms.
I don't want to get in trouble, but they were kind of collaborators for a small reason that it was a small tribe. So they were Anglicans. So they went to school. Everything was done through the Anglican Church. Even the schools they went to were owned by the Anglican Church at the time, at least for my dad. My mom's more from the Catholic side. I grew up in Zambia. We left when I was 5 years old, and I grew up there. And it's when I was 12 that I encountered what was an evangelical church. So I was going to regular Sunday church, which was the Anglican church. I can mention it. I think it's called St. Michael's in Kitwe, Zambia. But then when I was 12, 13, I got exposed to a lady who was my mom's friend. She was a pastor, and her husband was a pastor. And that's when I got introduced to the evangelicalism. It was really growing in Zambia at the time. There was a guy, actually, he's still famous. He's famous. I can mention his name, Nevis Mumba. He was very famous evangelical, one of these mega churches in Zambia that was growing. And it was growing. They were getting members from the Anglican. The Anglicans and the Catholics were the two largest churches before the 1990s. That began to change in the 1990s because many people were moving from the Anglican or the Catholic Church to Pentecostalism or evangelical sort of
that's
churches.
an interesting, because actually that kind of movement's been mapped in America, where some of the churches are broadly dying, the more established churches, Catholic and Protestant churches, but some of the more evangelical fundamentalist Pentecostal churches have, if they're not growing, then at least they're staying stable in their numbers. So you're seeing a decline in religiosity in America. Same in the UK, actually, where you're seeing a decline in the more established Anglican churches and Catholic churches, but there is this and I guess that, like, if you're a young person and you get a choice of going to a Church of England, sing this old school hymn on a Sunday, it's really dull and grey and boring, or Catholic church, which is all kind of Latin ritual, blah blah blah, or you go to Pentecostal church, which is all hands on, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but there's very much an emotional involvement. There's often music involved and stuff that just plays on your psychology. That's like, suddenly, okay, yeah, this is pretty cool, this is different, this is in your face, and it must have that kind of pull. Did it have that pull on you?
Yes, it did. And it did to the extent that I actually began going there instead of going to the Anglican church. And so as soon as I got confirmed when I was 12 at the Anglican church, I also have some sort of confirmation. It's different from the Catholic one. I went ahead and joined this sect and organization, began to be active, even got baptized again. I was very, very active. But there were some things I noticed which were very bizarre to me. For example, there was a lot of talk about this group is Satanist, these people are Satanist, maybe traditionalists are Satanists. The lady used to claim that she was actually bewitched by her neighbor and stuff, and God delivered her. That's what she used to say. And I was like, this doesn't add up. Because my dad was a scientist, he's deceased now. He was a scientist, he went for a PhD in America. And so he really taught us, him and even my mom were both very educated. They taught us critical thinking skills. So you questioned things, and I quickly began to ask myself a lot of questions like, what's going on here? Why are they saying that? Why is she saying that her neighbor was the witch or Satanist? That doesn't add up. Where did she get? What's her evidence? And so that was when I began to, immediately I was going into, but I thought, oh, this was really good. It seemed to be working for me. They were very welcome. It was a good community. You get a lot of community benefits in belonging to such churches. And that's one of the major reasons perhaps I'm still Christian, is maybe community. But that was a major turning point. That was like a major thing that caused me to be the more fundamentalist. But I wasn't too fundamentalist. I always in my mind questioned things. I just didn't say it. I was rather polite. People would say that I have a little bit of Britishness in me, or slightly, without being too loud about what I was questioning. So I would just keep quiet, and then I would go and say, that was not the case. I might tell a friend and say, hey, we went to this meeting. I don't think this was okay. That there was a time we had a prophecy meeting, and these people were making all these prophecies. And then after the meeting finished, I was with one of my very close friends, and I said, I think this is fake. I just think this is fake. It doesn't add up. And so that was always my journey. But I thought, oh, God exists. I believe in God. I think this is good for me. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing that they see. And maybe let me try my best to get closer to God. So I really did my best. And it is during that time that I also knew that I was an American by birth. I read the 14th Amendment. So I said, great, I get to live this country. When you're in Africa and Zambia, you always are planning to leave. I mean, when you see people across the board, sorry, you're just planning. The economic opportunities are very limited. Where I originally come from in Zambia. So knowing that I was an American citizen by birth made a huge difference in my life. And it is from that point that I decided that I was going to move to America. So once I was 18, I moved to America. I continued to be a Christian. I even joined the fellowship for the first 2 years of my school. But I was meeting different people, including one of my ex-girlfriends who was Japanese. And she was not Christian. So that from that onset, I began to make the decision that this is not something I like doing.
Yeah, so there's a couple of interesting things there, and I suppose Ricky, for you, how I'm always fascinated in the draw of community. So for several directions to take that in, which is that okay, if we're going to live in a post-God world, then we need to take the best parts of religion and apply that to life in general, because actually if some of those are really beneficial. So obviously the sense of community, it's not like religious people don't have the monopoly on that, right? So but it's things like Sunday assembly, which is okay, getting together with like-minded people, supporting each other, and so there is that draw. I did a reaction video to a Christian, was it Derek Holdsworth, Dean, I don't know. So I did a reaction video recently, and he was saying like 50-50, I'm going to go, if it's a 50-50, I don't know which one's true, I'm going to go with theism, because now he didn't say community, but he said like heaven and hell, like the idea of heaven. So you get these psychological draws to religion, whether it be heaven to give you an afterlife forever, or the church community being a psychological support network or sociological support network. For you, Ricky, how in leaving, so first of all, when you were in that, was that a good community? Did you feel it was supportive? And then when you left it, the flip side, you were starting to say that people were love bombing your wife, but did that supportive community turn on you at all?
Yeah. It turned on pretty quick, because you're basically, they'll say, the devil has you. Now the religion, they do community really well, and there's churches from East Coast to West Coast in the US up to Alaska, and then we have churches in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and they do community really well, where people in the other communities that travel to other communities for church meetings, they call them, they'll have like what they call missionary preachers that go on missions, but they're not really going on missions in the traditional sense. They're just going to another church and what I call preaching to the choir. They're not trying to draw new people in. They're just trying to show that they're all, what they say, one-minded. and which is almost, it's impossible to be one-minded. But anyway, that's a different subject. But so they do community really well, and if you're in that community, like, people will help each other. If there's somebody building a house, a bunch of other guys will show up, and a lot of the people are in construction, because even though there are some college educated people, for the most part, most of them just work in construction and that, because you're fighting what, the liberal college atmosphere and things like that. So it's like, that's the draw of that, I would say, is community, because I did lose my community, and I still don't really have a community. I haven't like built a new community or anything like that. But I'm fine with that, because I would say living the truth or living authentic to me is more important than being part of a group or tribe that I'm not comfortable in, because I know that these preachers God is not speaking through them. And it's like, to convince myself to believe that, I can't do. So I can't stay in that environment. I have to leave.
I guess there's
So
two things. Yeah, it's interesting you say God speaking through people, because of course this doesn't necessarily say that God doesn't exist, but I think there's a really important recognition before you get onto like whether God exists or not. The question for people in those religious situations, this would be the same with Chindy, particularly in certain, well, maybe in all the churches he's experienced, which is like, yeah, okay, I believe in God, but I don't think that God is speaking through you, and actually what you're saying doesn't make sense, and actually some of that is morally dubious, and contradicts this other person over there, this other preacher over here, who's saying something, who's also saying that that God's speaking through them. So something's going wrong here, and how do I know that my preacher is right and your preacher is wrong?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then the preachers, any preacher outside of that organization, they would say is a dead faith preacher. Like, God isn't speaking through him. God isn't doing any works through him. It's just through the preachers within that branch of Laestadianism. They're the ones that have God speaking through them.
So sorry, Chindy, with you, did you like, your experience of preachers? Did you ever sit in church and go, yeah, no?
I've done it actually, one of the experiences I had, I forgot to tell this story. Before I came to America, I went through Geneva, Switzerland, in France. My uncle used to work for the UN, and so I was there for about 3-4 months. And there was a church I went to where they were praying for people. And so I went up front because I really wanted to receive the Holy Spirit, and I was seeing people falling. And this lady was praying for people like 5 minutes or so, 3 to 5 minutes. And she whispered to me, "Why are you not receiving the Holy Spirit?" And she literally pushed me. No kidding. And I fell down, like, she pushed me literally, like I fell down. I was like, and I remember I was like, "Oh, you got the Holy Spirit." I said, "No, I did not receive the Holy Spirit." She pushed me, like she literally pushed me. And that was the moment I said, "No, I think there's something going on here. I don't think it's what they say it is." I do still believe in God even now, but I think that a lot of what is going on is there's a lot of deception, and a lot of some people are using the religion to earn a living. For some people, it's for other reasons. And so that's why I'm very skeptical, even for the apologetic enterprise. I'm really skeptical of the apologetic enterprise, because it's sort of like they'll say something. I mean, you mentioned a lot about the famous William Lane Craig or Frank Turek, the two apologists. To me, I haven't read much about William Lane Craig. I've read a little bit. He's more philosophical, but I've read quite a bit about Frank Turek. And Frank Turek is like, wow, what are you? It's like he's trying to win the argument. That seems to be the case, rather than trying to get to the truth and the evidence of what is being said. So he will attack the messenger. So if you ask a question that he doesn't like, he will begin to sort of like question you, rather than address the questions and address the issue truthfully. I think that's what I've observed. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I've observed from him and watching him on his cross-examination, which is one of his channels that I tend to watch once in a while if I want to really, really I'm being masochist and I'm torturing myself, watching those videos and trying to listen to what he has to say. Maybe he has something positive to say, but then most of the time it's kind of an attack on other people, rather than look at the truth and say, hey, I think here the person has evidence, and here the person has evidence on their side. My brother is not a Christian. He's an atheist. And I look at him and say, wow, yeah, the intellectual evidence is on his side. It's not on my side. I have more faith. It's okay to say, I just have faith this works. That's how I look at it.
This is what I know, and you've said this before in chats and super chats, and that's when I talk about you as being honest. Like, I disagree with you, and I think that's a dodgy epistemology, right? But well done for saying that, because I think some people don't bite the bullet and say, yeah, it's faith that's getting me over this difficult predicament. And William Lane Craig will dress that up and saying the inner witness of the Holy Spirit is stronger than any evidence that you can present to me. So he uses that get out of jail free card, which is effectively faith. He's just basically saying, I have faith of this faith acting within me. There's two different sort of versions of faith there, but that's that kind of like. And again, so the question is always, well, what is faith? Is it hope? Is it belief without evidence? And I would say that it's a mixture of those things. But theists sometimes don't like the definitions of faith because it doesn't make them look very rationally justified in holding to it. I don't know. Thank you. I love that story of you being pushed. I wonder if there's a church anywhere, somewhere that someone has been pushed, right? And they've stood up and said, I've just been pushed by the pastor. Hang on, guys. This is like, did anyone see that? I did not receive I was pushed. Guys, this is a sham.
The Holy Spirit pushed the preacher to push you. There you go.
Yeah, nice. Always
the way. It's always the way.
Damn it. Thought we had him there. Yeah. God made me do it. He wanted you to fall out. Yeah. Brilliant. Ricky, sorry, I did sort of cut you off earlier. Were you going to say something? You probably can't remember now. I don't know.
We were talking about community. Oh yeah, and losing community. That's the difficult part, and I know when I left that there'd be a few people that would reach out to me. I know most wouldn't because it's scary for them and they don't want to hear things that may be problematic with their religion, because that's like questioning their identity, basically, is what it is. But I knew that few people were going to reach out to me, so I thought, well, I'm just going to have to disarm them and ask them questions about history of Christianity, history of their prophet, because they call Estadius the prophet. And I had read, in fact, in 2015 they translated this into English. It's the his I call it his manifesto. It's called The Lunatic: An Insight into the Order of Grace, and it's basically his philosophy, psychological philosophy on the biblical authors. It's to defend his faith. So the lunatics are the Christians that are in Lestadianism, because people are going to look at them as crazy. And I guess that's not very unique, because if anybody comes up with a new religion, there's gonna be plenty of people that think you're crazy or whatever. But
or as Chindy says, a Satanist. You believe a slightly different thing to us. You're a Satanist.
So I knew that if I disarmed them with questions about stuff, because at the church, most people just believe what the preachers say, and there's not a lot I don't know of anybody in my family that studies the Bible. Let's say my closer family, 200, 300 people. I asked a relative, does anybody in the family study the Bible that you know of at all? And they said, I don't know of anybody. I'm the only one, and I'm not going there.
That's what they say. Well, you want to become an atheist, read the Bible.
Yeah. So I just, they have, everybody that I talked to had to admit, I don't really know much about the history of Christianity, and I don't know really much even about Lestadius, our prophet. I mean, even this pamphlet says the great prophet. I don't know if it's hard to see on that. But once I did that, I knew that disarm them, but I still knew they were still going to think the devil has me. And they would walk away saying like, oh, you poor thing, devil has you. I'm like, you should feel uncomfortable that you don't know the answer to the questions I'm asking. Like, I'm trying to spur them, but I know it's not going to get anywhere, because I listened to hundreds and hundreds of interviews with ex-Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, et cetera, And I think all of them at first are kind of naively thinking somebody's gonna be curious and ask, and I'm gonna help people. No, most just run away from you and you lose your community. So I
Yeah,
knew
and
that going in.
and I guess a lot of, like Chindy kind of says, a lot of what people say is, as soon as you come up against a difficult question, it's like, I've got faith, it's all right, and then you can compartmentalize that difficult problem and not think about it again,
Yeah.
and then faith. I mean, I'm not saying, Chindy, that you do that, but I guess a question for you, Chindy, is what form of religion do you think you have now? Are you, for example, a Christian, or are you more of a deist, a theist, or are you trying to work out what you are? I don't know.
So I'm a Christian, but I would call myself a progressive Christian, if that's a word for it in America. That's what I would call myself. And ironically, I do attend the church, but I'm not officially a member, which is kind of evangelical. They're more in the middle. They're not too aggressive on the side, but I do it because I have a lot of friends there. But I ask a lot of questions all the time. I always resist and point, and I enjoy the discussions in Bible study when I'm able to ask the difficult questions. For example, do you really think God is, like someone? I use your book a lot. Like I'll ask the same questions you ask, and then they'll be like, "Oh, wow." But fortunately, they are not the type that get angry or get frustrated.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
They try to answer the questions, and it works out for me.
Just to span that, because I presume that's a bit you're talking about, 30 arguments.
Yes, 30 arguments against the simple God. Yes.
Heaven, hell, Satan, and divine design. Everyone should grab at least 57 copies of that. No, thank you for doing that. I mean, that's fascinating, and what a wonderful church, comparatively speaking, that must be, because obviously there are plenty of churches where that kind of conversation would not be allowed to happen. So that's really good. And I guess, so my view of Christianity, or kind of any religion, is that I don't really I suppose I've changed over time, but the truth is really, really important for me, obviously. But ultimately, if you are morally decent as a human and you advocate for morally decent positions, and that would include your politics, because politics is a subset of morality, then and your belief system has no moral implications on other people, negative moral implications, then I don't really care what you believe. Do you know what I mean? Like, I do care, because I want everyone to believe the correct thing, and I think that will lead us, that will ultimately be beneficial to the world. But really, morality is more important than whether you or not you believe in God, because morality is actually what informs how we operate on a social basis. So I'm saying I advocate progressive Christianity over any other form of Christianity, for sure.
I always say that the best way is to be not dogmatic, because dogmatism is what's a big problem and a big issue. If you're dogmatic about your views and you think that you're absolutely right, and that's a major problem I have when I'm dealing with, even when I listen to apologists, is that they think that they're absolutely right, and they're there to teach you, to lead you into the right way. When you have that kind of mentality, it's very difficult to even have a proper discussion and open dialogue on many issues and many things. And so, an example, here in America, we're having a problem of, we're having now the issues, the issue of choice for women is a very good example for it. Which is, basically, we're having this problem because people are dogmatic about their religious views. A lot of people in those evangelical movements are in those situations, and that's what has led me to be very, very more on the progressive side of Christianity. Although one lady I was speaking to called me a Christian agnostic. I don't know what that means, but
interestingly, you could, but so you do get Christian agnostics, you get Christian atheists. So Christian atheist is a thing. And I guess, it might be akin to sort of secular Jew, which is very much a sort of cultural Jew without the kind of belief in God, the God of the Hebrew Bible. So there are Christian atheists, but that's really interesting. So Ricky, for you, obviously you were talking about ways that if you would challenge, people would just walk away and not be interested in those conversations, or shut those conversations down. So I guess you never had those sorts of Bible study classes and discussions where you could bring into to play Bart Ehrman or something.
No, never. I mean, I never go out and try to talk to family members or anything like that. I'll only respond if they come to me to talk to me about stuff. And so it's like, it makes it uncomfortable because, they'll come to me to try and save my soul because I should be a Laestadian and that's it, all of their faiths are dead faith. So I'll respond with a bunch of questions or my thoughts on things because I know that pretty quickly the cognitive dissonance is going to get them to retreat from it. So that's typically how it goes. Like, somebody will text me something or call me and maybe invite me to church meetings or something like that. And I'll say, well, here's what I find problematic with the church. And then when that happens, they might respond with a few other questions or, ask me a few things. And then I'll respond a few more times. And then it gets shut down. We're like, we better not talk about this anymore. Like, they're done. And I'm like, I remind them that, remember, you reached out to me and you asked me. And I'm only responding. Like, I'll never come to you and try to get you to lose your faith. If you're happy with that, as long as you're not trying to create basically boundaries, is very difficult. But once you try to, explain to them what boundaries mean and, how that I won't come to you and ask you to go to a movie with me or a concert or anything like that. So, if I did that, you'd cut your relationship off. If you feel you can come to me and try to get me to go to your church, I won't cut you off still. Like, I enjoy the dialogue. I enjoy talking about the difficult things. Whereas when you're in that fundamentalist mindset, I remember when my mind was like that, where you'd hear stuff like that and you just want to shut it down. Like, you just didn't want to think about it. It was too scary.
Yeah. Do you now, do you look for difficult conversations with your local believers? Do you like walk around town just looking for someone?
No,
maybe sitting down reading a Bible and like, I'm gonna go sit next to them because I fancy an argument.
I wouldn't really seek that out, but I do enjoy it when people do reach out to me because there's things I like to share with them.
Yeah.
But I do know that the odds of it having any effect on them is very slim.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah. I've told this story before, so do forgive me, people. But if there are new people on the feed, I remember about 10 years ago, my old house. I was in the shower and I heard the doorbell go, and it was a Saturday morning. I was like, I know who that is. I swear that for some reason I just knew that they were Jehovah's Witnesses. And my partner opened the door, and I just turned the shower off, and she went. I could hear her say, "Oh, my partner would want to speak to you," and I was like, "It is a bloody Jehovah's Witness!" So I jumped out the shower. I was like dripping wet. I was like literally stumbling down the stairs, pulling my trousers over my hastily put on pants, and like just putting a t-shirt over me. I got to the front door. I was like, "Yes!" And these guys must have thought, "Oh, this is brilliant." Some guy. I was like, "Right."
I got a story that I got to tell you that's similar to that. My son ended up leaving the church before we did. Well, years before we did, when he started college. And of course that was painful for him painful for us because like our son not only went to college, he stopped going to the church, but he also told us he was an atheist. And at the time we were Christians, and believing Christians, and we're thinking, oh no, our son's going to hell, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, he went down the whole intellectual path. He just read hundreds and hundreds of books, but he wanted to read the Book of Mormon just out of curiosity. So he actually went on the Mormons' website, filled it out so they'd come visit him so he'd get his hands on one of their books so he could read it. I thought that was brilliant. And actually now he gave it to me, so I'm going to read it out of curiosity. But he's read the Quran and everything because he has a thirst for knowledge. And I'm glad that he, at 18 or 19, what she said when he was young, he knew he was out. He said even as early as 9 years old, he knew he's leaving the church as soon as he was out of our house,
Wow. And
so he's a lot smarter than I am. I stuck around.
But I wonder what drove him to that at that age to go, there's something wrong here.
I think because one of the reasons I think is because he grew up in our household, which was much more loose and liberal, I would say, compared to most of the church people that were in the Laestadian church. So since I lived one foot in the world, one foot in church, and my wife did too, as they would say, he was exposed to more things. Plus, my wife's family is not from the Laestadian church. They were what they call worldlies. So he had exposure to that. So I think, and he also had friends in school that weren't from the church, because at his school he went to, there was nobody from the church there at the time. So he had exposure to more people that, and more experiences. So he just knew that this isn't correct, and he just knew that he had to get out.
This is the thing, isn't it? Like, is normalization. In this case, that's normalization of other beliefs. And like I talked about before, if you want to keep people believing, then you just shut them off from the rest of the world. This is how cults perpetuate and work: is shut them off from all other influences, and don't read anything else, don't do anything else. It's just us. And the more you, and say it's the same with like sexuality. So the more you see and understand and know people who are of a different sexual preference to yourself, the more normalized it becomes, and the more you see their humanity, and the less you are likely to say that is morally wrong, because they can't go to hell because they're decent human beings. And I guess this gets onto the destructive elements of heaven and hell. Chindy, actually, what are your views as a Christian on heaven and hell? Do you find them, I mean, you said you've read this book and I have a right pop at those ideas, but have you changed your ideas on heaven and hell? Are you now a universalist, or do you believe there is some kind of heaven and hell?
I'm a universalist, basically. I'm not even a Christian universalist, which some people are. I'm just a universalist. I think that heaven and hell for me is kind of like what Candida Moss calls in the persecution, her book about persecution myth, revenge fantasy.
Is that Candida Moss? Sorry,
yeah. That is called, it's a revenge fantasy. It's basically this idea that, you didn't listen to what I believe, you didn't believe in what I believed, therefore you're going to burn in hell. I think that's how I see it. It's a reflection of people reflecting their views and saying, God told me that if you don't listen to what I am telling you about my theology, then you're going to go to hell.
That's essentially what religion appears to be in general, which is a projection of yourself onto God. And therefore, of course, God believes what God thinks, what I think is wrong is what God thinks is wrong, because I'm basically reflecting myself in God. So God is just this ideal version of myself. And so therefore, if you don't believe what I believe, you're not believing what God believes, you will go to hell. So yeah, for sure.
It's to me. So for me, I'm pretty much, I say, my belief in theism and my belief as a Christian about God, it's not about, I'm going to go to heaven, I'm going to go to hell. It's about now. It's about how it helps me navigate life right now. If it becomes about, I'm going to go to heaven, therefore I'm going to believe in God. I mean, God knows you. He knows that the reason why you're doing it is because, according to most fundamentalist Christians, that's what they say, God knows you and knows everything about you. So if you're doing it because you're afraid of hell, he knows that you're not doing it for good reasons. And so I think, in my personal view, I look at it as it's about now. That's why I'm a Christian. So everybody says, you're going to go. In fact, people call me a heretic, in which I answer, well, if I'm a heretic, you've not confronted my point of view. You're still in the same situation. It's like if someone told you, JP, that you're going, or Ricky, that you're going to go to hell because you don't believe. Yeah, I've not counted your good arguments. I still have the same problem. And I think that's how I look at it. So I look at it as it's a fantasy. It's a revenge fantasy by some Christians. And for some, they just don't like the idea of somebody not believing what they believe. I see this a lot, even in churches, evangelical churches, some evangelical churches I've visited. When I say, I'm a Christian, but I'm not a Republican. I'm actually a left wing. I'm a Democrat. And they're like, what? Oh, wow. Why would you be that? Why, it's like, it's now all of a sudden I am the enemy. I'm no longer the friend.
Well, that's really interesting as well, because there's a lot of evidence to suggest that politics has more primacy than religion. So when people are, and there's evidence to support this recently in data that shows that if a church doesn't adhere to your politics, rather than change your politics because, you know, religion is true and this is your church, you will just move church. So Americans are much more likely to move church on the basis of religious on the basis of political belief. In other words, politics has primacy and religion plays second fiddle. Now that's really interesting. So if you go up to someone and say, "Yeah, I'm a Christian," they say, "Yeah, brilliant, I love you. You're a brother." And they say, "Yeah, I'm a Democrat Christian." They go, "You're a bastard. You're going to go to hell." And it's like, no, I'm the same Christian, or no, but you're not the same Christian because of all these political things. But then obviously there's that integration of politics. You know, pro-life for some people is a truly religious stance. So actually, read the Bible or find out the rabbinic teachings, and you'll see that life started at birth. Historically in biblical times, and so it's a very different understanding. And you know, anyway, don't want to get down the long weeds of you know, pro-life, anti-choice, pro-choice thinking. I'm interested in this idea of living in the now. I think that's really good, Chindy, which is to say that I'm interested in making the world a better place now. There's so much about certain Christians, which is like, well, rapture, it's all right. I don't need to look after the world. It's sod it. We're all gonna go to heaven soon, or at least I'm going to go to heaven. So don't need to be a steward of the world. Don't need to bother about the future. And there's also a lot of Dan Barker talks about this in his book Mere Christianity, Mere Morality, where he talks about how the Bible, predominantly, especially the Old Testament, is about not about morality. So look at the Ten Commandments, not about the morality of how you and I should act with each other, but it's about adhering to this one God and me looking up, and this is power relationship, and there's only this one God, and everything's about me and God, this relationship, rather than this relationship, you and I, guys. You know, so there's very little in the Bible, not enough in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, about how we should as humans exist morally together to make the world a better place. So I really like that, Chindy, that you recognize that, okay, forget heaven and hell, we're all going to be saved, so don't need to worry about that. How do we go about making the world a better place?
I basically learned that from my dad. My dad always used to say, nobody's going to come here and fix the world for you. You have to work and try to make the world a better place. So that's how I tend to think. And I always push back when a lot of Christians in Bible study are talking about, oh, if you remember, like, oh, this world is a bad place. We can't wait. I will always say, well, we got to do something now. There are hungry children now. There's a problem in this world right now. We've got to do something about it. We can't wait for some, you know, a superior deity. Yes, I believe in God to fix that problem. So that's how I see it.
Yep. You've gone a bit quiet there, or unless that was me.
No, that was the phone call coming in, because I'm using a cell phone, which I probably will never do again. I'll use my computer next time, because it's just like you get a lot of disturbances from all over the place on this cell phone. Never using it again. Next time I'm going to use a computer.
You're doing a good job, mate. Ricky, do you have anything to say about that? I can't even remember what we're talking about then.
Yeah, I was just regarding like what's happening here now on this earth, when people in those religions are they're predicting end times. I heard my whole life that, you know, we're in the last days of the last hours, the last times. And my whole life I heard people in the church saying, like, who cares about the environment? And, you know, these lefties worship the environment, and who cares when the earth is going to end soon anyway, and stuff like that. So you don't really participate. All you're supposed to be worried about, and the preachers say it every Sunday, so is worried about getting to heaven, because, you know, this life is temporary, and all you do is worry about is getting to heaven. So stuff that's happening on this earth, or you said your relationships with other people and all that, isn't that important. It's your relationship with God, so that He will let you in there, so you don't go to hell and burn.
Chindy touched on this, and this is something I've written about in several of my books, which is, and this is a great point, Chindy. He says, because it agrees with me. But the idea that it's really difficult to be truly moral when you have heaven and hell on your shoulder, and even if you don't think you do, it's there in your psyche behind your conscious thought. So then when you're being good, are you being good just to get to heaven? Are you being good to avoid hell? In other words, is your goodness very egocentric, self-centered, in very core sense, so that you know, I one of my first articles for Only Sky Media was the carrot and the stick and morality of this kind of religiosity being very different from humanistic morality, which is about how do I make the world a better place? Why? Because I want to make the world a better place, because that's good, and it's has this kind of sense of intrinsic good. Whereas a deeply religious person might say, I want to make the world a better place. Why? Because then I get to heaven and I avoid hell. And there seems to be an interesting difference in the motivation there, which can then lead you to make also different moral decisions, bad moral decisions. And I think heaven and hell are the ultimate bribes, emotional bribes, theological bribes that mean that morality can look and is certainly motivationally very different between humanists, say, and certain Christians.
Yeah, and I'll be living in very little bit, and I apologize for that.
No, it's fine.
Friend. But basically, I was going to say on the heaven and hell issue, I actually told the Christian, there was a Christian who believes in hell, and he's a friend of mine, and he was telling me, Chindy, you are, what if you found out heaven and hell is, and you see your brother and you see your best friend, my best friend, she's also an atheist. You see your best friend going to hell, and you see your dad or whoever. And I said, listen, if God is the one who does it, I'll be an anti-theist. So for me, the idea, in fact, one of the arguments that really bothers me is the Stephen Law's argument of the evil God hypothesis. That really bothers me. Even up to now, I'm thinking about it. Like, if God is evil, I have to be an anti-theist. I'll be literally saying, if he's evil, I can't be a theist. I can't be a Christian. I'll have to be an anti-theist.
So for those who don't know, theodicies are defenses or potential reasons why so much evil, so much suffering exists in the world, given that God is powerful enough to do something, be able to do something about it, knowledgeable enough to know what to do about it, and loving enough to care to want to do something about it. So why is there all this suffering? And what theists do is they say, well, there's just the right amount of evil to make good meaningful. There's just the right amount of evil to allow for, free will is so important that it can justify that amount of evil. There's just the right amount of evil, so on and so forth. And Stephen Law came along and said, actually, you can switch all those arguments and turn them on their head and say there's just enough good to please an all evil God, and actually there's just enough good to make evil meaningful. And there's, we have free will, but God wants us to use it for evil. Unfortunately, sometimes people use it for good. And so it flips all of the theodicies on their heads, and it's perfectly symmetrical if you forget all other arguments to do with God. So this is just looking at the problem of evil and theodicies. So, you forget the Bible and what that teaches you. But you could then look at that and say, well, God is just lying in there, trying to get, and on purpose. And of course, it's very difficult to argue against this without, getting your knickers in a twist. So that is a really, really interesting argument.
It's a really good argument, and it's a great argument. That the other one is the one you make, which I read in your book, which is basically about I think you made it. You may have got it from debate, but you also made it, which is about why didn't God just create good people? I mean, but you're talking more to the Christians who believe in heaven and hell, but still, it's a very good argument. It's a great argument. That's
which one? Just create people in heaven?
In heaven, yeah, just create people in heaven. Why didn't God? It's also a good argument for somebody like me on the problem of evil, because why not just put people in heaven? Even if it's a universalist argument, why do I have to go through this? So,
yeah, exactly. You know who's going to pass the test. You know who's going to freely come to love you. Forget creating all those other people. If the idea is they need to pass the test to get into heaven, just take those people, put them in heaven. Don't create create all the other pain and suffering and death, and people are going to go to hell. And then you can't be accused of creating people that are knowingly going to go to hell and suffer for eternity, if that's what you believe. So that's a kind of, which then leads you to a universalism, which is like, yeah, that makes sense. Therefore, God must be universalist. If I was a Christian, right, I would be a universalist. But if I was a Christian, universalism doesn't really fit with the Bible so well. So then you come under other problems. But I do applaud you for being a universalist, because I think that is the only sensible way to morally understand God. But there you go. Chindy, thank you so much. I mean, I don't know how much longer you got, but
I'm about to leave right now, so I really do appreciate you inviting me. I look forward to more discussions in the future, and I really do thank you. I appreciate it.
No, I
and
really
thank you,
appreciate you being
and
here.
Nice listening to your story, Ricky.
Yeah,
and hopefully you guys enjoy. I look forward to watching this again, actually, when I'll see to hear more about it. Thank you very much.
For sure. No, thank you, and mate, we'll do this again. We'll have more members chats like this. So there's a little perk for those who do support the channel, and you are such a great supporter of the channel, Chindy. I really do appreciate you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief.
Next, yeah.
And for Ricky, we'll be having our own just one-on-one for a much longer sort of unpicking of your religious experiences. But are there any other sort of little nuggets you want to throw into the mix today about how, your experiences of deconverting, the challenges you had, or maybe the strongest arguments that helped you to deconvert?
I would say what I've realized is that leaving that type of environment, I gained a lot more empathy, and also I would say I appreciate my time on this earth, my existence on this earth. I heard so many people tell me over the years, like they just couldn't wait to die to get to heaven. They couldn't wait. They just like, ooh, I just can't wait, and I just want to get this over with, because I want to go to heaven. And it's like, it's strange to me to hear that, because it's also like, okay, you're just wishing your life away to get to heaven, but it's like you're not appreciating the life you have here on this earth. It's like that seems, if you really believe in God, you're telling him he's doing it wrong. Like, I shouldn't be here. I don't want to be here.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing, because of course that leads to then antinatalist arguments, which are, well, your son or daughter, your child that's just been born is, according to the Bible, far more likely to go to hell than heaven, right? The path to heaven is difficult and windy, and not many people get on it, and so therefore, looking at that probability, you might as well murder your child, because actually they'll go straight to heaven then. And the idea is like, well, this is all a bit rubbish. I can't wait to get, like, that's so. But it's logically consistent in the sense that that is the greatest thing in human conception. So of course it's naturally going to be better than here. Even if you've got a great life, it's almost going to be infinitely better in heaven. So.
Yeah, and that's what when somebody, a young person would die, people, well, obviously you'd miss them, you'd be sad, but they'd say, well, at least they're gone to heaven. They don't have to struggle through this adult life and stuff like that. So it's just a sad way of looking at things.
Inventing a God concept in your mind like that you think is objectively real is like carrying a heavy rock around in your mind and then blaming others for the problems in your own life. Yeah, interesting way of putting that. Daniel, who's a great man, always good supporter of the channel. Your answers to the bunker question, JP2. So I'm obviously missed asking Chindy this, but I want to get him on again, no doubt will. So for those of you who have seen many of my interviews, I end up with my quickfire questions where I ask people a bunch of kind of irreverent stuff so you get to know them a little bit. Ricky, who would you? So here's the question. I usually frame it something like this: there's a zombie apocalypse. They're going to bite your face off and kill you. This is based loosely on my awesome fiction books, Survival of the Fittest, Metamorphosis, and Adaptation. So you should definitely get them. But zombies going to bite your face off, Ricky. You luckily you're a prepper and you've got a bunker ready. You get a chance to rush off down to the bunker, but you can take 3 people with you who aren't your friends and family. Which 3 people from now or from history would you take to live for a month in a bunker?
Well, that's a tough one. From history, from recent history,
it can be anyone.
I would say Anthony Bourdain. I really enjoyed all of his programs, And I always thought at some point in my life I would have liked to have went out to eat with him and just discussed things. It would have been fascinating. He was an interesting fella. I read his books and stuff, and I enjoyed all of his, programs that he had on television related to traveling and food.
Yeah, American celebrity chef, author, and travel
Yeah.
documentarian who starred in programs focusing on the exploration of international culture, cuisine, and the human condition.
Yeah, I thought he'd be a fascinating fellow to discuss things with, and he's I knew there's a lot of places I knew I'd never get to travel to, so it was like enjoyed watching his shows because I got to experience these places all over the world that I'll probably never get to see.
That's
So,
like why my kids love watching gamers on YouTube, right? And you're thinking,
yeah,
what that? Come on, mate! But they get to play games that they can't play, or they get to play vicariously through this other person in a way that's far better than their capabilities, and do all these things with far better skins. And you're like, yeah, that's just how we live. We live our lives empathetically through other people. But yeah, sorry, I interrupt.
as for, I guess I always said Anthony was the only celebrity I'd ever care to meet. But
Interesting.
if there's anybody else, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, because I was a bodybuilder since I was a teenager, which is also another fascinating thing, is I shouldn't have been wanting to build my body because that's they preach against bodybuilding, and I thought this is strange. I'm the only person sitting here that's weightlifting, so it's like they must be talking about me.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And a couple years ago, I got to meet Lou Ferrigno, and my family and I took a picture together flexing with him. So the Incredible Hulk, the original
Oh right,
Incredible Hulk, Lou
yeah.
Ferrigno, but I haven't met him. So
So would you take? I mean, so you got Schwarzenegger, Anthony Bourdain. Who else in
got to come up with one other one. Gordon Ramsay.
Gordon Ramsay?
Yeah.
Food. So is food important to you? Do you like food?
Food, yes. I basically anytime I want to go to travel, it's all about eating. So my wife and I just map out restaurants beforehand, and so when we go to a town, we know where we're gonna go eat. Anything else is just secondary.
Secondary.
It's just
Yeah, nice.
as long as I'm getting fat and happy, that's all I need.
So when I've answered this question before, so thank you, Daniel, for the question. I've said because I'm such a boring geek, it would be stuff like William Lane Craig, I don't know, Richard Carrier, and Tobias Singer.
Oh, that would be interesting.
And then it's like I'd sit and eat popcorn,
The
or I'd just
fireworks.
get right involved. It's like that month ago, we'd
That
either
would
all
be
kill each other
yeah.
or it will just go like a flash. And by the end of
I'd
it,
pay to watch that.
yeah, that'd be great. But then, sometimes I think, well, Vladimir Putin, do you know what? Like Obama, and I don't know, someone else, and like, go for it. But yeah, that's. I don't want to go off on my Ukraine Russia tangent because I'll be going for a long
Yeah.
time. But thank you for that, Daniel. Really appreciate it. If anyone else has got any questions or super chats, please get them in soon because we'll probably go for about another 15 minutes. But yes. So is there anything else you wanted to add to any points or any sort of anecdotes with your experiences of religion, Ricky?
Nothing. Probably we can get into it more in depth if you, like I said, if
Yeah.
you want to do another
Yeah,
one
sure.
of these. I got a lot I could share. So
Yeah. So one thing I was thinking about a little bit today is this idea that God created or this idea. Actually, God didn't create the universe, but assuming you believe this, that God created the universe, and to say that you believe that God, you actually have some kind of credence in actual data and science. You say, right, the universe is, I don't know, 13.7 billion years old. And then we came along maybe 200,000 years ago in some kind of form and have been evolving since then. But you kind of take on evolution. Let's say that you are driven by data and actual facts and science. And you say, well, how, like, if I was a Christian, how would I explain that? Like, how do I justify that God would wait 13.7 billion years to start a relationship with humanity? And why not just create the universe 200,000 years ago or like 10,000 years ago? Why do all that waiting? What is the point of that? And then, what was going on there. Can God get bored? Obviously, God has no language, so God, I don't suppose God can get bored. But just I mean, were these questions that you ever thought about when you were sort of starting to doubt and thinking like these little tiny little, oh, what's going on
Oh
there?
yeah, I
Why?
would. Yeah, definitely. I would think of those things all the time. Um, what really, what really made it uncomfortable too is like when you're hearing that, like a preacher saying that, okay, dinosaur bones were planted by the devil to confuse man. And, you hear things like that. It's like those are times where you're like, how do you believe that? Like if you're in this environment, you're supposed to believe that God's speaking to the preachers, and He says something like that. I can't believe that. It's silly. It's silly to me. So I would think about the things like you said. You're thinking, okay, you got this long period of history. Humans are only here for this tiny little portion. Well, they would be obviously young Earth creationists. I never really talked to them much about. I don't recall anybody talking that much about the age of the Earth and stuff like that. And I'd never asked the question. I guess there are a lot of questions I probably would have liked to ask them, but I knew that the answer was going to be accept what the preachers say, and that's it. Whatever their answer is. And when it comes to something like that, I think the standard answer I would have got if I would have asked the preachers that would have been, well, we don't know why God does the things He does. That's anytime anybody's ever got pushed into a corner on any of those tough questions, it's pretty much comes back to that. We don't know why He does what He does, and just what you have to do is believe this faith, and even if you don't believe it, what they say is believe this, and the understanding will come later. Which that never made sense to me either. It's like whatever this thing is, you have to find every way that you can to believe it. So it's like you're just throwing something on your lap and saying, okay, this is the truth. Now find your way to believe it. And
I mean, for me, it's like an abductive argument, which is we've got two hypotheses that are competing with each other: omnigod theism and naturalistic atheism. So when I look at the universe and say, well, it's been hanging around for 13.7 billion years, God's had to use evolution, there's abiogenesis, and blah blah blah, all this kind of stuff. Life naturally comes to where it is now after this really long, protracted evolutionary process that is random mutations and things don't look good, and there's predation where stuff has to eat other stuff and kill, and they're suffering just so that they can survive and exist. So you look at all this and again, the why wait 13.7 billion years, and then you say, well, which hypothesis better, does this data better support which hypothesis, and which hypothesis better predicts that data?
yeah, and I
It's
was
like,
the more I learned as I'm going, studying all this stuff and growing, and I feel like I'm in baby steps still. I got a long way to go. My son's actually going for his PhD right now in biology. Plus, he's an instructor in biology right now too.
wow, amazing.
And I mean, I'm so happy for him because I feel like I didn't get to achieve what I would have wanted to achieve, which I probably would have liked to go into psychology or biology.
Mm,
I'm so happy that he was able to. I mean, I get a thrill out of it that
that's brilliant.
he's doing that. So for him, he's learning all this stuff, and he's like, what makes more sense? He's like, he can look at all of this stuff he's learning from biology, or do I believe this magical thinking? It's like, what makes more sense? And that's the thing is I try to push away those thoughts. Another good example of pushing away things is even over the years of growing up too, or even adulthood, I figure I need to get to know the Bible more. Nobody really studies that at church. I should probably. I mean, people read it, but they don't really study it, and that's why they can't ever see any inconsistencies. So they believe that the King James version is inerrant and stuff. So I'd pull out the Bible for maybe a week or so. I'd start studying it, and I'd kind of get afraid and put it away because I'm thinking as I'm reading it and studying it, I'm like, this sounds silly. This is like just childish and ridiculous. And then it'd scare me. I'd put the Bible away and I might not pick it up again for another year or two. Think, okay, from now on, every day I'm going to read the Bible for half an hour. I'd read it for a little while. Same thing would happen. Right away, the thoughts are coming. This sounds like a story, just a made up story. Scared. I don't want to go to hell. Push that Bible away. Believe what the preachers say, what they say. I'm just going to try to. I'm going to try to believe it. And I tried my whole life, for 40 years, tried to believe it, and it never took because it just always sounded, what I'd say, an immature mind.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting when you talk about the whole cadre of biological thinking and all those textbooks in biology, and you say, right, I'm reading all these textbooks. This is all like very coherent stuff, but which hypothesis does this better support? Like, does this look like God has got his hands all over this? Does this better support the God hypothesis or naturalistic atheism? And every time the coconut, it's got to be naturalistic atheism for me. And like, you know, it's you in order to make God the most convincing hypothesis. Well, you have to add, well, even in order to make the God hypothesis even work, you have to add on all this stuff. So it's such a cumbersome belief system because you're saying, well, okay, predation exists because blah blah blah, and the original sin, and you're adding on all these add-ons to your belief system. Whereas a naturalistic atheist goes, well, that's what we predict on naturalism. Literally, what you would predict would be the case is what is the case. When someone said, Beggy said, we don't accept scientific discoveries or anything else on faith. Why should I accept religion on faith? It's inconsistent. I would broadly agree with that sentiment. I would say we do accept certain things on faith. Here's my really, but hopefully you can see this in the light. So let's take the atheist position here. So this is, I often do this. I've done this before with a pint glass. I don't have a pint glass. I've got a wine glass. But imagine you've got a jar, right, or a pint glass here, and a full pint glass is a justified belief, right? So you have evidence. I filled my pint glass up with evidence to such that, and we can talk about anything, right? I believe that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, or we're going to continue orbiting the sun tomorrow. I'm going to fill that pint glass up with evidence, but there's always going to be a tiny bit of faith, such that I'm not a brain in a vat, or I'm not living in a matrix. There are certain things that we just kind of assent to faith to get us over that problem, because like, how do I prove that I'm not living in the matrix? Well, I can't prove I'm not living in the matrix. So okay, let's just have a little bit of faith there. There is a bit of rationality you can provide. You can say, I don't have good reason to believe that, right? Otherwise, it's the same with unicorns. Unicorns could be true, but I don't have good reasons to think that they are. So, but I would say there is a little element of faith that we're not living in the matrix or something like that to get us to a justified belief. Now, I would say if we apply this to say Christianity, right, I would say that all the evidence points to the fact that Christianity is not true. The theist, on the other hand, fills their pint glass up only with only a little bit of evidence. Okay, I would argue that the Gospels, for example, are really poor quality evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And I would refer you to my book on the Resurrection, a critical examination of the Easter story, to really go through why I think that's poor quality evidence. But then, like Chindy was sort of going through earlier, then they fill the rest of that pint glass up with faith. Now, they argue about what faith actually means, and I would really truly say that it's belief absence of evidence. So it's like, when you don't have the evidence to fill your pint glass up, you have to fill it up with faith to get you to that justification, because actually the evidence or your cognitive biases and stuff. So what you can do is you can expand the evidence part of your pint glass. So take that as a little sort of dregs of water left in the pint glass. You can actually expand that water magically by using things like confirmation bias and all these things that say that evidence there is actually worth more than the atheist thinks it's worth. Do you see what I mean? So basically, you go through these things to fill up your pint glass, and then that's your rationale for believing in any given thing.
Yeah,
and I would just say,
oh, sorry, finishing off.
No, go for it.
I had a relative that I was talking to one time too, and I said, I asked him, I said, well, how do you know, what you believe is true? How do you know that this version of Christianity, this study is true? And they said, well, the Holy Ghost told them it's true. Well, how do you beat that? I mean, you just
how do you know the Holy? How do you know the Holy Ghost? How do you know the Holy Ghost?
Yeah, and what's problematic with that too is that a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness or whatever would say the same thing. So I asked, well, how is it when they say that that's not valid, but when you say it, it is? Well, the only reason it is because they're saying it. I mean, there's no validity to it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, and
everybody,
that's a problem with miracle claims that from different religions, and any kind of faith claim like that, which is they're completely subjective. And if there's a plurality of experiences like that, then you have to admit that these other ones are, if they are false, then there's a very good chance that your own is false because you're just, as you say, relying on subjective. You know value subjective arguments that it happened to me, therefore it's true. It's got to be true because it's my story.
Mhm.
Right, well, okay, how do you, the question is, how do you debunk their claims and then apply that to yourself? And this is what John Loftus did in his book, The Outsider Test for Faith, which is set to say that what people don't do is take themselves outside their own sort of body, or outside of their own kind of cultural and social milieu, and see themselves as an outsider, and then start asking them the same sort of questions they would ask outsiders. So, like, okay, you've had a religious experience as a Muslim. Well, this can't be true because of X, Y, Z. But you never apply those sorts of critical evaluations to yourself. As the saying goes, that's why I set the end of most of my videos, which is question everybody, particularly yourself.
Yeah, and I've asked that of a few people too, and like, how do you know that, this is your way is the correct way, theirs isn't, and and I'd say I give examples like the Mormons believe this or Jehovah's Witnesses believe that, and the answer I get every time is I don't care what they believe because I know what I believe is right. So why do I even need to know what they believe? So it's like it's useless. I mean, almost useless to go down that road because it doesn't get anywhere. I guess I've come to accept that I know, like, it feels cathartic to share these ideas with them and ask these questions, but I know that it's not going to travel and it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be right away. I don't need to know that, and I got the right faith, and that's all I need to know.
Yeah,
So
and so as Zeleny Sox says here, you can say, for example, an ethical claim that your religion is better, and then say their miracles are from the devil. But of course, they can say the same thing, and
yeah,
they do say the same thing. And the point is, how do you arbitrate that objectively? Because really, that's just a subjective kind of analysis. My moral, and this is why when you're doing these evaluations of your own beliefs, that you really have to use moral philosophy. You can't just say that what God commands is right because God commands it, because you're like, well, that's what that guy says over there, and he's got completely different commands from a completely different God. So how do you arbitrate who's correct and who's more ethical? Well, you have to use moral reasoning. You have to use moral philosophy here, which means that actually we're not talking about God here. We're talking about moral philosophy. Let's bottom that out with some moral philosophy, and then we'll get back to which God is better. But there you go. So does anyone have any other questions, any super chats or anything like that? Oh my goodness. Okay. So just going to say, does anyone have any questions? This is like a 2-hour long question. Right. I will give you a really quick synopsis of my theory of truth. There are lots of different. So, what the question, Jonathan? What is your opinion of the best theory of truth in philosophy? I think truth is really problematic. So you get these things. There are lots of different theories of truth. Let's give a popular one: the correspondence theory of truth. So, what is a correspondence theory of truth? That is to say that if you make a claim, a proposition is true if it corresponds with objective reality. So if A equals B out there, and you say, I think A equals B, then I am being true because it corresponds with the objective reality of that. The problem is epistemological. So broadly, I would agree with the correspondence theory of truth, but I would then say, but you can never know you're true. You just can't know you're true. Because the only thing that we can know for certain is that cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. So whatever the thinking entity is exists because it has the ability to doubt that it exists, and by doubting it exists, it must exist, right? So to experience, you must be an experiencing thing. So whatever that is, that exists, but everything else is a probability like, again, it goes back to this. So actually, nice segue back to this, which is like, there's still a little bit of faith that I'm not. I still could be a brain in a vat, right, or living in a matrix. So whatever claim, even that the sun is going to rise, or the Earth will still orbit the sun tomorrow, there's still a bit of faith that, do you know what, I'm not a brain in a vat. In other words, I can't know 100% that planet Earth will continue to orbit the sun tomorrow. It's just like a 99.9999999%. So the correspondence theory of truth would say that I say we will continue to orbit the sun tomorrow. And someone might say that is true because it corresponds with the objective truth that we will orbit the sun tomorrow. But proving that is really difficult. So I'd say it's kind of almost irrelevant what truth is, because knowing that something is true is more difficult. So therefore, I'm sorry, I'm probably babbling on here, but the question, what is truth, is as much an epistemological problem, which is epistemology is to do with the theory of knowledge, as much like how do you know it as what the truth is. So this is really important for things like divine command theory. People that say what God commands is right, you say, okay, well, that's a truth claim there. So you've said that what God commands is right, but I want to know how you know that, and how you know you've got the right God, and how you know you've interpreted those moral, ethical commands correctly, and etc., etc., etc. And so therefore, like, whether or not that's true becomes an epistemological problem. I hope that answers your question, ultra significant footnote. Please let me know if I have answered it. I think, in all honesty, so therefore, given that correspondence theory of truth is very difficult to epistemologically justify, you then start going down things like pragmatist routes and doing like Bayesian analyses. So it's about probability and what's useful. So generally, things that seem to be true are probably more useful, and therefore they are pragmatic. It's pragmatic to adhere to them. So, for example, the scientific theory works, and it kind of gets us to a better theory of reality, because it's useful. If it didn't work, so if all our science was wrong and we just kept getting things wrong, then we'd end up dying and things would go wrong. So therefore, there's a pragmatic element to truth as well. Like, truth that works is truth that's useful, right? And we can repeat these kind of methods of getting there, and so on and so forth. So it all gets quite confusing. So I would say truth is, there is a correspondence theory of truth, but you can't know that something is true. And so therefore you take a probability analysis of things using something like a Bayesian theory, and then elements of pragmatism as well. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, I'm sorry, and I've done a lot of babbling on. Did that make any sense, Ricky?
I can't really add much to that, besides I could say I'm satisfied with not knowing an answer. I don't feel the need to make up an answer to comfort my mind. I feel like I've refreshed from saying I don't know, compared to just magical thinking, you know?
Yeah. I know that's a really interesting thing about religion, is that it gives you definite answers for a lot of things. And I've been talking about this in a lot of interviews recently, which is actually sometimes humans don't like to be free thinkers. We in the free thinking community, atheist community, we talk about free thought is brilliant, and you can think what you like, and you can work yourself towards these conclusions from the bottom up. And we do all this work, you know, as I did in my book, Why I'm Atheist and Not Atheist, which is you do all this work to create this wall of belief, and eventually you get up to here, are built on all these foundations. Flip side is that that's really hard work, right? If you've got to do all of that, that's really hard. And if I can just go to church on a Sunday and someone tells me the truth, someone just tells me the top of this wall, right? Actually, that's easier. And there's a lot of people that they prefer that, which is to say, I don't want to be a free thinker. I just like to be told what to think, and that's so much easier.
There's a lot of people I know that, yeah, they're like that, and there's a psychological dependency on, all they have to do is go to the preacher. He'll give them the answer. Do what the preacher says. That's all you have to do. I've heard of many people say, like, I like that I don't have to think, and it's like,
Yeah.
but for people that aren't like that, that's a very uncomfortable environment, and it was very uncomfortable for me. I even had somebody recently ask me too. You say you're seeking truth. You know, what is truth? I said, wherever the evidence leads me, and if I find that something changes, I have no problem changing my mind. Because one time somebody accused me, well, you're too stubborn to change your mind. And I said, I'm definitely not too stubborn to change my mind. I left a high control religion that I was in for 40 years. I'm not too stubborn. I'll
So
go wherever the
it's really
evidence leads
interesting.
me.
Yeah, I've had these conversations with people before, and they're like, "Yeah, you're really dogmatic. You're an atheist. You don't change your mind. You're always arguing the same thing." It's like I've changed my mind over whether God exists. I've changed my mind over my politics. I've changed my mind over whether free will exists. I've changed my mind on ontology. I've changed my mind on morality. I've literally changed my mind on every single big subject in the world.
That brings up a good
Like so,
point too. As I transitioned out of this high control religion, my politics went from right winger to left of center, and that
yeah.
was that was unexpected. It was another one of those things too, where it's like wow, what happened? Like I was voting Republican all the time. Now I'm more nuanced, and I'll vote for whoever I think the best person is, and I don't have like this binary thinking. And the stuff like that's fascinating. But then trying to explain this to people that are in those environments is impossible.
It's such a common thing, that though, as well, really is a common thing. And actually this kind of leads into a little what Beggy says here, which seems to me Democrats' general platform aligns much more with Christianity than Republican, and yet so many Christians are Republican. And I think there is this disconnect between what the Bible says, and you only have to look at things like turn the other cheek, or the Good Samaritan, in group, out group, the idea of love thy neighbor, love thy enemy, sorry, all these sort of things, and lifting over the tables in the temple, and the kind of progressive, uh maybe socialist even elements of the Bible, and then you try and put that together with the prosperity gospel, or like evangelicals who kind of hate everyone other than themselves, and you're like, yeah, there is a disconnect here. But you're right, people who leave Christianity, and I think, on my opinion, is people that just do a lot more philosophical thinking. I don't mean like academic philosophy, but just get a bit more philosophical, start questioning everything and why they believe things. Then I just think you naturally go to the left. I really do. It happened with me, and yeah, I see that as really common. And yes, there are right wing philosophers, Roger Scruton and people like that, but they are fewer and far further between. So I think that's a really interesting and common phenomenon, Ricky. Yeah. Uh, I was just looking at other questions or anything. We can compare ethics more reliably than prove miracles are true, or that they came from God and not demons. I've done lots of talks on miracles. And check my back catalogue. I've even had a debate with Caleb Jackson on whether miracles exist or not. Check out Myth Vision. What are your views on miracles? Did you believe all the miracles of the Bible when you were a believer? Did you believe in general miracles? Were you more susceptible to believe those kind of claims, or were you quite cautious?
I would say that when I heard things, especially things that happen, I mean, things in the Bible always seem problematic. Noah's Ark, all that stuff, and that's a whole nother subject we can go on maybe another time. But even like when Laestadius had his awakening, there was things that he claimed, like there was an earthquake, and he saw fire on the top of the church building. Things that weren't happening, and stuff like that. It's like, or they talked about how like a whiskey merchant was in the church, and he couldn't get out where they normally like to leave before the sermon started, and he couldn't get out, and then people saw a bird pecking away at his ears, and then he ended up making repentance and stuff like that. So you're hearing these magical things and everybody's believing it because it's coming from the prophet. And to me, it's like that sounds like a mental health issue. Like, I mean, I've heard lately. I haven't really dug into them, but I've heard lately about some studies that are kind of correlating hyper religiosity with schizophrenia. And I really want to dive into that to see if there's any legitimacy to those studies and stuff. But it's like you wonder, was their prophet? Did he have mental health issues? But yet they all believe that these things happen, and it's like
Yeah,
I can't get over
yeah,
that.
I often wonder that, people like Paul, what sort of person was St. Paul by Paul of Tarsus? What sort of person was he? Was he like a really, you know, maybe a charismatic leader, such as you see some of these mega churches in America, or someone like Trump, or someone who's really narcissistic or really about himself? Or was he genuinely about the love of others? You know, was he going around preaching because actually made him feel really good, and it was all self-centered, and he was actually getting money for it, and all those kind of ideas? Of course, we'll never be able to answer that, and we do armchair psychoanalysis. But I think it's really interesting about these religious, to think about these religious leaders and how they, you know, what sort of people they were and what was driving them. But yeah, Jonathan, thanks for your previous answer. What are your ideas about occasionalism? Is it not really absurd to say God causes everything? I am going to have to leave that for because we are going to have to shoot off now. I've just had my partner through the window, which is nice because she's just gone. She lifted out the bottle of wine, and I'm like, yeah, I could do with a refill. But God causing everything is fascinating. I mean, goodness, I've written a book on that. But it's unlike me to spam my own books, right? Because you haven't experienced that at all in any of my videos. Which is, oh my goodness, where's it gone? I can't find it. Anyway, I've written a book called Did God Create the Universe from Nothing? Countering William Lane Craig's Kalam cosmological argument. However, I seem to have put it, oh no, here it is. So if you want to learn about causality, that's it. Did God do that? What is, you know, these are, no, I'm going to answer that question another time. But great question. Yeah, I'm desperate. Okay, no, but thank you so much to Ricky. I've really enjoyed having a chat with you. What we'll do is we'll have another one of these, and we will, you know, do a deep dive into your experiences with Lestadianism. It sounds like a very interesting position. And hopefully you've got, you know, you're up for that and you've got more to say on the matter.
Yeah, I would enjoy that. That'd be great.
Fantastic. Can I just say thank you so much to everyone who has supported this channel over the last, you know, year since it's been kind of properly going. Obviously this channel's like 11 years old now, but you should see some of my old videos where I've got like actually color in my beard and hair and look young and youthful. It's quite sad, the passing of time. But yes, so I really thank you for all the people who have been in the chats there. I'd like to say to Ultra Significant Footnote, come along and join the Ask Me Anything next time, because actually there will be hopefully lots of questions asking me anything, and we can dive deep into occasionalism and causation and efficient causes and, you know, creation of things and everything, and that is just a whole can of worms. Carrie Ann Chrysler, thank you both. A very good discussion. I look forward to the next time. So do we. What are your closing thoughts, Ricky?
Well, I don't want to steal your closer, but I like when you say question everything, because I mean that's all there is. Just question everything.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like when Ultra Significant Footnote asks about what my theory of truth is, you know, so often it's just about probability assessments of stuff. But the problem when you have probability assessments is it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you start coming to things with a background knowledge of like, oh, supernatural events could take place, therefore that's going to affect your probability analyses of whether that thing was a miracle or not. And so, you know, there's loads of unpicking to be done on how you do probability assessments, but you know, it is questioning your background knowledge. It's questioning actually, you know, why do I think miracles are plausible? Do I think miracles are plausible because I want them to be true? Is it because I believe in God? But then do I believe in God because I believe miracles are true? And is this just a big giant circle? And so it's about unpicking why you believe stuff as much as what you believe. And when you start understanding that, you know, you could be a victim to wishful thinking fallacy, which is I'm believing this because I want to, I'm believing this because I want to go to heaven. And then it's like, you know, that's the thing about atheism is that we're not believing it because it's selling us stuff, right? Like, we're going to die and it's going to be worm food and the universe will go through some kind of heat death, and you know what, it's not a lovely bribery of heaven. So I like to think that there's less wishful thinking in our belief system as much as it is a belief system. We have to build up all our beliefs on top of that. But anyway, I'm starting to babble. You get the point. Question everything. But as I say, particularly yourselves, because your motivation for believing things, there's a thing called motivated reasoning. Again, I talk about that in my resurrection book. It's so important. The reason why people believe in the resurrection, and they are much more likely to ascribe greater evidential value to their belief, and to see this evidence down here that I would say is pitiful evidence, they will expand that to be much greater, is because they are motivated to do so, because that gets them to heaven, that gets all their other things, that gets them their sense of community and the Christianity and all that kind of stuff. So question yourself. This is a long rambling ending to this video, but motivated reasoning is super, super important to understand, and it's super important to understand whether you are doing motivated reasoning. That's the same for me. So when I read a book and I'm like, oh, this really, I really like this book, this is a brilliant book. Is it brilliant because it's agreeing with what I believe already? And am I just ascribing greater value to that because of my confirmation biases? Really unpick why we think things and why we value things. And once you do that, then you're going to be on a much sounder footing. And my final words will be about thank you for this for Chindy. Sorry, could not finish the program. Thanks, Ricky, for sharing your experience. Look forward to listening to more of it. So thank you, Chindy. Great to have you on board.
Thank you, Chindy.
Anyway, that's enough of me rambling. Thank you so much for all your support. You take care, question everything, particularly yourselves. In the meantime, toodle pips, and I hope you have a good life until the next time.